And the information that I'm sharing about exams can also be incorporated into assignment design. So this probably goes without saying for many of you, but when we think about designing exams, we want to think about asking questions that require students to demonstrate critical thinking or apply what they're learning to a real life situation. And I know there's some concern around intro level classes and fundamental knowledge and those sorts of skills that we want students to develop while also not plagiarizing. So I think the next couple of slides will contain question design suggestions, which might be helpful for you to maybe rethink how you're phrasing your questions. So in the next slide, I'll talk about scenario questions. So I should say that all of this information comes directly off of this website that I've cited in the slide. But I really like this website because it really gives you concrete examples of what a scenario question might look like. So this type of question is great since it simulates a real world or work or other authentic experience. It shows students how they'll learn the skills they're using or how they'll demonstrate their skills. So while the initial question was multiple choice, the question was adapted to make it a scenario question. So you can see that this scenario question is a much more practical situation where the student has to think about how they would actually address the situation as opposed to picking from a set of answers. So that's the first type of question that I recommend. That's a scenario question. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about analysis of visuals. So these types of questions do a really nice job of asking students to analyze or interpret information from visuals. And the visuals are provided as either part of the question or part of the answer. And so when students analyze or interpret visuals, they're able to demonstrate knowledge related to a process. They're able to show that they can troubleshoot. They're able to explain or interpret a process or a set of ideas. And so here you can see that the initial question was, again, sort of straightforward, multiple choice, low level thinking. The second question is a little bit more difficult in terms of its level of thinking, and they would use a chart to show that they're understanding, to show their understanding of what to check in terms of a repair. So I did not provide the flow chart. We don't need that to understand this example. But when we put visuals as part of a question, we want to think about making them accessible. So that means that many of you already know this and you already may do this, but when we put an image in Sakai, we want to put text that accompanies the image explaining what it is. In a general way, we don't explain it in a way that answers the question, but really thinking about how we use images, especially if we have a student who may need some extra assistance understanding visuals. Okay, the last question is, one slide back, please. Thank you. The last type of question is this idea of asking a question plus the reason why. So in addition to providing the answer, the student has to provide a brief explanation about why they selected that answer. So some of you earlier suggested asking students to show their work. Some of you said that some of these companies already provide that process. But I think it's still a nice exercise in asking students to reflect on what they're doing, explaining their reasoning. They have to understand why they chose their answer. And so here you could see the initial question was, what are the 3 signs of edema? But then the second question, again, creates a more practical situation that allows the students to explain what the signs are and what they would do. So these are some ways to think about question design and how to do that while you're thinking about your exams. And then I will turn to the next slide where I'll share some examples of how to set up your exam in Sakai. I'm not going to pull up Sakai now. There is a video provided by the Office of Online Learning that does a great job of walking through how to use each of these features in Sakai. So I will make sure that you have that reference. But I do want to highlight some of these ideas so that you can think about using them if you don't already in setting up your exam. So creating a time limit, again, so that students don't have unlimited amount of time to possibly Google things or look for resources that you don't want them to use. You want to think about randomizing orders of questions or answers, again, so it's more difficult to share the exam and answers. You want to include a pre-test warning. So some of you mentioned an honor code. So also thinking about a pre-test warning. So having the student sign a statement or type in response to a statement that indicates that they will follow an honor code while they take the exam. Making sure the students can only access the exam once. That makes it more difficult to share the exam. Delaying feedback. So I know sometimes when we grade, we release the grades one at a time so that we can get students' feedback more quickly. And this makes sense. We also, though, want to be careful about not sharing feedback before everyone's completed the exam. So thinking about not sharing feedback on the exams until everyone has completed them. And then also displaying one question at a time. So if students can go back and forth in their exam, sometimes they may rethink answers to questions and start changing things around. So we really just recommend that we show one question at a time. I'm sure there are other things that we could do. These are the sort of high-level recommendations that I'll echo from the Office of Online Learning. They're certainly easy to implement in the settings in the quiz and test area in Sakai. And again, they do an excellent job of walking through how to do that. So in our last few minutes, I'll turn our attention back to the chat, and I'll invite people to talk about strategies they use to design exams that promote academic integrity, or ideas about how to enhance existing exams. And I'd like us to think really about like what works or what we might like to try, so that we can kind of leave here with some additional ideas. Also, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Andy, just saw your hand go up. You want to unmute yourself, Andy?
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, maybe this is a question, maybe an example, but in my face-to-face classes, I'm a history professor, and in my face-to-face classes, I would always have a bi-weekly quizzes where I would hand out a quiz of 20 questions and students would be in the class and they would have to write their answers and answer them. And converting that to online, I taught an online class in the first summer session. I found that there was obviously plagiarism going on because the answers that I was getting to some of the questions were just so similar and nothing that was related to what I had told my students. And I'm sure that it might have been something as simple as when they're taking the quiz, just having Surrey beside them and say, you know, what was the Tet Offensive or whatever it was, and they were just writing answers down like that. So I did begin to shift, and instead of doing that, to put questions that were based on documentaries that I included in my class and framing those questions so that you could not have gotten it by Surrey, that you had to have had looked at the documentary to get the questions. And I found that was, I think it was a bit more helpful. But I guess my question would be, how do you overcome, say, a student that's sitting with Surrey beside them on a quiz? Are there any strategies to try and avoid that and make the assignment, you know, maybe useless if that's the case?
So I'll just chime in, Andy, and then I'll open it up to other folks. I think you actually solved the problem yourself already by recreating the questions and designing them in such a way that students would have to engage with the course materials. I think you sort of already found that. In terms of using Siri, gosh, I don't know. I mean, that's a really tricky one. I think, again, it really goes into the type of question you're designing. If plagiarism is a real concern, making the exams weighted less is helpful.
I certainly did that. I
Mhm.
reduced the percentage of the final grade for the quizzes.
Yeah.
It was more of an incentive for them to keep up with their readings,
Mhm.
but I would have liked to have had something that would have been, a little bit more challenging than, say, if I asked a question, again, go back, what year was the Tet Offensive? Someone takes that into Surrey and they immediately get the answer, but trying to work your answer around that you can sidestep Surrey might be a strategy for these things.
Yeah, that's tricky. Does anyone have any thoughts regarding Andy's question? I haven't seen too much about use of Siri in the articles I've looked at around academic integrity, but I do know that the online world does unfortunately open up a lot of possibilities for cheating that didn't exist even.
Well, that would be an easy one. All you got to do, you're sitting on with your online quiz and you've got Siri beside you and
Right.
she'll answer your questions.
Right. And so that's where things like proctoring come in. And I don't really want to get into the nitty gritty of proctoring as the university is considering different solutions, but where the students are watched while they take the exam. I know people have mixed feelings around the ethics of this. Mary, did you want to chime in, please?
Yeah, so Andy, I'll just share a little bit. So when we went online in the spring, the first exam that I gave was like a week after we went online. And because I'm in nursing, I almost always give multiple choice exams. And I switched that exam to include some short answer because I was worried about them being able to Google and use their devices to take the exam. And then for the last exam, I ended up not doing short answer because I didn't have enough time to grade all of it. And I just put a time limit on the exam and use some of these, the questions came randomly and the answers were randomized. And I actually found that the average on the exam when and I told them it was open book and open notes, so they could use whatever resources they wanted. I found that the average on the exam for the third exam was actually lower than the average on the exam when I included the short answer as a way to try to find strategies to keep students from cheating. So the time limit, and I think that since they thought it was all open note and open book, that they didn't have to prepare it all. And so by the time the time limit was set, that they couldn't look up every single question. They had to have some idea of the content. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I did find the time limit as a way to, and then, just making it all open note. I felt that some students would cheat and some students wouldn't. So just keeping it open note and open book was a way to make it equal for all students.
Okay.
Excellent. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks for the suggestions, Mary.
I just wanted to jump in on top of that just to say that if your outcome of any individual quiz is for them to, for instance, learn dates or understand kind of the broad contours, the historical moments of an event or something, I wonder if you could start making it open note, with the idea being that if they have to look up the information, they're likely going to remember it as well. Although, I appreciate how you want them to memorize this stuff and have it in their minds. So just a thought, but I have heard of lots of examples, to Mary's point, of folks kind of leaning into the online environment and just making things open note with the understanding that the information is so readily available anyway.
I think the short answer piece is also another suggestion that the Office of Online Learning supports. It does, as you indicate, sort of change the grading time, but it does also force students to think things through a little bit more than they might have to if they're answering a multiple choice question. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with multiple choice questions. There's plenty of literature on how to design them properly. I thought that was a little out of scope for the time we have today, but there are ways to design multiple choice questions that do get at critical thinking. So it is possible, more ideal if they're supplemented with some sort of explanation or provide an example from the text, as Erin is suggesting. What other ideas do people have related to academic integrity and exam or assignments? Are there things that they plan to try in the fall or that they plan to redo based on prior successes?
May I add something,
Please.
if you don't mind? Yes. So first, I really start my work with a mindset that it's not my job to control plagiarism 100%. I mean, whether we are in the class or online, there may be always an issue. So to feel the pressure is already intimidating for me as a faculty. And maybe that's why the best to do is to set the criteria loud and clear from the beginning. And when it comes to assignments and changes, at least in the last 2 months when we went online, I did consult with my students. So I put them on the spot. I could do this assignment, and could be a structure for us, or I could do this test this way, and this is a structure. This will be the penalties for people who do 1, 2, 3, 4 against academic integrity, etc. Being a smaller classroom, I'll have to say my maximum size is 25 students, was really helpful in making sure students themselves, when they help me in selection of what they think will go the most with them. And again, I had some students who had severe internet issues, etc., to deal with. Then they are all responsible for the results, because the fact that they were included in the process as well as the consequences, then it was fair and square for all. And in that way, they felt they had a say into it, rather than that I suspect you will always be doing, you will go against academic honesty, and that's why I'm doing it in certain ways to penalize you. So yes, I understand. As I said, it did happen on certain occasions, but I'll have to say they were few. And they were no different than we were in class and somebody would try to look over somebody's assignment or something like that. I do understand though, and I feel with my colleagues who teach larger classes and numerical things, and that could be a different strategy. But again, something else we do is that we rotate different skills. So for me, as I teach a language, there will be reading, writing, speaking, listening components. So we make sure we rotate so that not a single assignment will be the major criteria that may make students forced to go to plagiarism. And in that way, they have a spectrum of levels. So those who may not be good at one, they do have still the chance to show their creativity in other skills. And in that way, we have a balance, somehow.
Thank you for that example. I do want to highlight what you said regarding student agency and student involvement. Anytime they're involved in talking about the types of questions that might be on an exam or what they might see on the exam, or you help them design the exam, that does help in terms of minimizing tendencies toward academic integrity violations. They have some say-so in what's happening, they have some buy-in, and that really does help with the motivation. They tend to think positively of instructors who do this. And again, building that relationship with your students can go a long way in holding off any violations, as the students may perceive them as disrespectful. If you have that sort of relationship, that's not to say that even if you have a good relationship, a student won't violate the policies, but it is certainly something to think about. So I see that we have a few questions. If folks want to stick around, you're welcome to stick around for the next few minutes. It looks like Susan's explaining the group quiz. I know folks do this. Our colleague at FCIP who teaches social work talks about group quizzes, the way she structures them is students have a quiz at home, they take it in Sakai, and then they come into class and they talk through it as a group. And part of that grade from the quiz is the quality of the conversation they have in the group about the quiz and the responses. Accountability, yeah, things like that. So thank you everyone for your participation today. There is a list of references on the slides that you can consult. We're also in the process of putting together an annotated bibliography on some resources regarding academic integrity. I know it's a concern among a lot of faculty. For those of you who are teaching large classes or have colleagues that are teaching large classes, FCIP will be collaborating with the Office of Online Learning to do multiple workshops on managing large classes. And so those will be coming in the first week of August. We know that's also a concern faculty are having as the fall approaches. So thank you everyone today. I hope you found this helpful. We will send out a feedback form. Please do share your feedback so we can use it to inform future sessions. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to stick around. If not, thanks for your attendance today.
Thank you.